opportunity to meet with you and talk to you about any issues or concerns you might have. If you guys had an opportunity yet to read my Pastor's Corner, it's a barn burner. It's about oxtail soup. You'll love that one. And just to be clear, it was one of the worst soups I ever had to eat was oxtail soup. Not because its taste or flavor was anyway enhanced by it being the tail, but because I just kept thinking about the business end of that ox and that tail. And for some reason, that just made me a little bit uneasy about eating that chunk of meat in my bowl. Just so I can, for those of you who haven't had an opportunity to read that Pastor's Corner, that was the frame by which I was approaching it. I know, it didn't taste very good at all. Today, we want to focus on encouraging. Now, why is that? Well, because there's enough discouragers around to go around. I mean, there's plenty of them. You can, people you bump into, people you had. Did I tell you the story about my dog, or actually Tina's dog, Mojo, chasing the neighbor's chickens? It is good enough to say again. I might have told it on a Wednesday, but a few weeks ago, Tina's dog, Mojo, who is a bird dog, by the way, and the last I checked, chickens are birds. These chickens were free-range chickens, which means they don't have a fence. And they were out in the middle of the road, and my dog, Tina's dog, took off after them because she was walking them down in front of the neighbor's house, not knowing the chickens were loose. Well, the neighbor come out screaming and saying he was going to shoot the dog. Well, Tina kind of simmered him down, and, she can do that. Well, 2 weeks ago, we were out walking the dog again, and I said, hey, didn't you promise the neighbor you'd have the dog on a leash? And she said, yes, I did, but the fence is up and the chickens aren't in the road, so I don't want to put the dog on a leash. I said, well, the neighbor might be a little upset. Sure enough, went by the neighbor's house, and he come out and was screaming he was going to shoot the dog. Now, it is fair to say he was not an encourager. And my wife wanted to basically shoot him. And I imagine he probably felt the same. But reason, a voice of reason came in. I said, certainly, you don't really mean you want to shoot a dog over a chicken? I said, if that dog killed one of your chickens, I'd replace that chicken 2 for 1. And I said, and you can keep the carcass. I said, don't you think it's a little bit over the top to immediately resort to firearms over a chicken? And he got to thinking about it, and he became very friendly at that point and realized his mistake. The point is we gravitate to discouraging things right away, don't we? The point of that whole story is to just think how quickly we become upset or inflamed over something that, in the grand scheme of things, doesn't really mean an awful lot. And yet we do it all the time, don't we? And that attitude finds its way into our congregation, into our church. Just think of the different culture that's created through discouragement. Think of that. I mean, there is opportunity to encourage people wherever we go. Whether it's the neighbor being calmed down for my idiot dog, or it's the person in church who's come and has an axe to grind over something that, in the grand scheme of things, probably doesn't matter an awful lot. What would the church look like if its heart was one to encourage? Now there's a difference between encouraging people and shining on to them. You know what I mean? That's kind of a Midwestern term we use, being shined on to. That means you're just kind of blowing smoke. You don't really mean what you say. You just, you say a few things, pat people on the back and send them on their way. You're just trying to curry favor. That's not encouraging. In fact, that would be discouraging. Encouraging means you're there with them in the best of times, and you're there with them in the tough times. You're there to be a friend when being a friend is a hard thing to do. Encouraging people means you're looking for the best, not for the worst. That you value the person rather than the effort. Encouraging people is something that we need to get back to. Because there are people who walk into this church every Sunday, you might be one of them, and some people who never have stepped foot into this church, but yet are coming for this Sunday, and they need to be encouraged. They're literally waving red flags and those flags mean I've changed my whole day to be here. I've changed everything in my schedule. I on purposely came so that I could sense the presence of God, who, by the way, is the ultimate encourager. And you know how they sense the presence of God? They sense Him in you. Or they don't. That's the downside of that, right? Or they don't. Because you and so many people like us have adopted not an encouraging culture, but a discouraging one. One that is quick to point out the flaw. One that is quick to identify the critique. And we actually think we're doing people favors. In fact, we've taken discouragement to another level when we say, well, I'm just giving constructive critique. Well, who appointed you that role? Who gave you that authority? Oh, you did it yourself. We live in a democracy. Ask yourself this question. How is it affecting your neighbor? How is it affecting the person you sit next to in church? In my day and age, the term nag was not politically incorrect. Maybe we can go to Scripture and find out what God has to say about being an encourager. Now, you can go through chapter 8 of 2 Corinthians, and you can find a lot of instruction on what our character should reflect. Paul writes, "And now, brothers and sisters, we want you to know about the grace that God has given the Macedonian churches." This is so critical because the Macedonian churches were not wealthy by any stretch of the imagination. They were small churches kind of suffering along. They were trying to get along. They were a new church in a new country. In the midst of very severe trial, their overflowing joy and their extreme poverty welled up in rich generosity. It's equivalent to the homeless person giving you a bite of his sandwich. In fact, what the Macedonian churches are doing in raising funds for the Church of Jerusalem is equivalent to them giving the entire sandwich. Paul testifies, "For I testify that they gave as much as they were able and even beyond their ability, entirely on their own. They urgently pleaded with us for the privilege of sharing in the service to the Lord's people, and they exceeded our expectations. They gave themselves first of all to the Lord, and then, by the will of God, also to us." Wouldn't you like to be around those people for a moment? Here's a church that's just struggling to survive. They've been asked to give to the church in Jerusalem, to raise money and give to the needy. They themselves are needy, and they go beyond their wildest expectations. They get right with it. And you know that kind of gift is an encouraging one. What does it mean to encourage? Well, the dictionary definition is fairly straightforward: to give support, confidence, or hope to someone. Are you able to do that? Can you do that today? Could you find a way to encourage someone? In what ways can you have to personalize this for it to mean anything? If you're thinking, yeah, my wife could do a much better job of encouraging me, you're not getting the message. What about you? What could you do for your spouse? What could you do for your friend? What could you do for the person you sit with or are around in church? You know, some of the most encouraging things that have occurred to me since I've been here is people like to encourage me by pointing out the flaws in the bulletin. You know, I've not yet read the bulletin. In 4 years, I don't give it my time. I put stuff in the bulletin. But to me, what's more encouraging than reading the bulletin is hearing Steve give the announcements that are in the bulletin. Do you know, I expect there will be mistakes in every bulletin henceforward. Not that I demand that there are mistakes, but the person who puts the bulletin together, whom, by the way, is a very good friend of mine, and I trust explicitly with everything but my bulletin, she is not a perfect person. Did you know that? Just ask her husband, Joe. There you go, encouraging. And she is going to be prone to make mistakes on a bulletin. But do you know that no matter who you put there, unless it's Jesus Christ himself, there will be a mistake in the bulletin. But yet we pay so much attention to those mistakes. What other things do you see that you pay attention to that give you mistake problems? Oh, my preaching. Let's just pick on me for a little while. I'm good with it. I'm cool. There will be times in context I probably won't get it right. Thank God you only got 2 more weeks to listen to me. There will be times where I'll mispronounce a word or misrepresent something. Not intentionally, just like the bulletin isn't intentionally made to make a mistake. And yet I will hear about it. And that's okay. I need to hear about those things. I need to be better at what I do. In fact, every week I force myself to watch the very tape that is rolling right now. And there's nothing more painful than watching you perform something in front of the tape. You see all of your jerk-like tendencies. Or there might be something that goes on in the church, whether it be a women's breakfast or a men's breakfast, where there might be some fly in the ointment. Or it doesn't meet your expectations. Or it isn't as good as you wanted it. And you know why we begin to focus on those kinds of things? Because it takes the focus off of us. It takes the focus off of our effort. And you know what? I could care less if the bulletin is 100%, if my sermon is mistake-free, if the women's breakfast or the men's breakfast was 100% chef quality. I don't care about it. I'll tell you what I care about. I care about the people who are behind all that. I care about their hearts. Their hearts. I care about their willingness to join in, even though they may make a mistake, even though from time to time it might look like amateur hour, because the fact remains it is. And those are the very kinds of people that Jesus Christ went to form his church. Mistake-prone people. And he didn't discourage them. No, he encouraged them. He gave them the confidence and the courage and the commitment to step forward because they trusted him. The actual Greek term parakaleo has several contextual definitions attached to it. They all really do apply, and I want to take a look at a few of them. Do you know what the term admonish means? I didn't for a long time. I was 19 years old before I found out what the term admonish meant. When I received an admonishment, I actually thought at the time it was a good thing. See, I'd gotten in a fight with another airman, and let me tell you, I prevailed. He deserved everything he got. But I still got in trouble. Monday morning I came to work, and the sergeant wanted to talk to me, and he said, I have a letter of admonishment for you to sign for getting in the fight with that airman. And I thought it was like, a letter of appreciation, because everybody wanted this guy's clock cleaned. And I just happened to be the guy stupid enough to do it. And so he put this there, he goes, this is a letter of admonishment, and you're going to sign it. And I thought, is this? And I literally, stupidest thing I ever said was, what's an admonishment? And then he showed me, which encouraged me never to do it again. You see, in his chastisement of me, in his discipline of me, I was encouraged to be a different person. And sometimes we're admonished by God. Sometimes he enters right into the middle of your life, and he encourages you to become a different person. Now, all of us like it when we're patted on the head, burped on the back, and slapped on the rear end and saying, good job, keep doing it. Few of us like admonishment. But you know what? Let's let God admonish us in his word and in the presence of his Spirit. Let us not take his authority from him and be the chief admonisher of the other person next to you. Unless you're given that authority in your home as the leader of your home. Encouragement also means to entreat, to beg to call towards someone and tell them to come in a certain direction. It means to convince them through your heart, your emotion, that they can do that which you ask them to do. Encouragement is often used in consolation. I remember encouraging these girls when we lost Kim, right? Hugging them and telling them it's going to be okay. We'll get through this together. And together we encourage one another. Do you know Jake encouraged me just before he passed? A few weeks before he passed, there was a time when Tina was in the hospital and Jay was in the hospital, and I was at the hospital the whole time. And I went up to sit with Jay because I had a lot on my mind. I'd begun to pray about, I knew that God was moving me away from this church. And I went to talk to Jay because he was one of the leading people to call me to this church. And we had many a private conversation, him and I, about this church. He was an advocate for me. He was an encourager. He never came to me to discourage me. And in fact, I hated to even tell him that I think God's calling me from this. But he patted me on the hand. And it's going to be okay. Just trust God. It's going to be okay. To have a dying man tell me it's going to be okay. Do you know the kind of encouragement that comes with that, that's attached to that? He was consoling me when he should have been the one to be consoled. To exhort and to strengthen. That's what encouragement means. It doesn't mean to tear down, and yet you and I think we've been appointed self-admonishers. In fact, this year I've heard, just a rumor, that they're going to have a board election for it. We're going to put it on the ballot, and there will be 5 people elected to be the chief admonishers of the church. No, I'm kidding. What does that do when we take that attack? It destroys people. It ruins their motivation. It takes an effort that they're trying to do, and even though it's not going to be perfect, it makes them seem like that's all you focus on is the imperfection. If that's the case, nobody's coming to church. Because there's but one perfect person amongst us, and his name is Jesus Christ. There's a power attached to encouragement, and you see it in Scripture time and time again. Things that are written in Scripture are not there for self-edification. They're not there to take up space because the writer didn't know what else to put on his essay. They are there for a purpose. And you see, in fact, I don't know one sermon that Jesus came and said, I got a real barber, I'm going to discourage every one of you. I don't ever see that in the character of his words intended to discourage us, unless it's to discourage us from sin. That's the only time he's discouraging us. In every other sermon he provides, he takes a negative, blessed are the poor, and he puts it into a positive. Therefore, encourage one another and build each other up. Do you know it takes work to build each other up? But we can tear something down that fast. That fast. It takes real intention to build someone up. Each and every day. How would you like it if, as you walked through the door of this church and came into the sanctuary, that every word you heard was negative about you? Would you come for long? But do you know it only takes one negative word? It wouldn't have to be every negative word. It only takes one negative word, and that's the one you're going to think about all day long. You can take all the positives, all the pats on the back, all the real encouragement, and someone can turn right around and say something negative to you, and guess what you're going to focus on every minute from that point forward? You're going to think about that. Encouragement renews commitment. Not only does it build people up, but it renews a commitment to know that perfection isn't what we're valuing. It is the heart behind that journey. It is the one that's in relationship with Jesus Christ. If you know that's the heart of your pastor, the heart of your friends here in church, then you're going to come and you're going to try hard. Because now you take a tact of, I don't want to disappoint people. I don't want to let folks down. I want to do my best. Even though it might not be perfect, they're going to know that I gave my best. Oh, I love this in verse 4. They thought it was a privilege. They thought it was a privilege to share what they had. A privilege. As meager as it was for them, they thought it was a privilege. And you know that Paul never said, oh, you only collected this much? Oh, come on. No. He championed it as if it was the treasure of King Solomon himself. Encouragement confirms our priorities. Notice what they do here in verse 5. They gave themselves first of all to the Lord, and then by the will of God to us also. First to God. See, that's what we're doing this for. We don't serve the church in a sense. We serve God, and the church is by the means by which we serve God in. And we all have to be serving together because, you know, the skill sets that Gary has, many of those I don't have. And I got one or two that I have that Gary doesn't have. And unless we're working together, we'll never accomplish near as much apart. We have to work together. That's why we're called together as a church. Not the building. This building can fall down. In fact, I've been reading lately that there will be everything west of I-5 is going away at some point. Hey, when Port Angeles becomes an island, I'm going to run its governor. But notice their priority is first to the Lord. This is who's compelling us. Paul might be asking us, but God is compelling us. And then to each other. You got to get those priorities right, because if we reverse that, if all I do is commit myself to Dan, well, Dan might tick me off someday. But then I'd be done with that. I'd be walking away. All you'd see is the back of some Converse flip-flopping in the air. I'd be gone. But you know, our friendship is going to go beyond my time here as a pastor, not only because I'm really good friends with Dan, but because God has commanded it to be so. He's compelled us to be together in this journey. We are co-workers in Christ. And you know what? Dan doesn't do everything perfectly. Neither do I. Encouragement renews confidence. It renews your confidence. Have you ever had somebody that all they could do is find fault? Let me tell you what, I sat through many a bad meal with my wife when I first met her. It was so she tricked me into this marriage. I know it. I just know it. And here's how she did it. I came home from the field. We were dating pretty seriously. And all the guys in the day room, that's what we called it in our barracks, they were watching a TV. And as I walked up there towards my barracks room, they all said, oh, you're in for it now. I said, what do you mean? Oh, Tina made you some stuff. And every young man knows that when something is either knitted or baked by their girlfriend, they better evaluate the seriousness of this relationship. And sure enough, I went into my barracks room and she had snuck in there and laid on there a knitted scarf, which I still have today, and cookies. And they were tremendous. She said, my wife can cook some cookies. And then I went to her parents' house and I met her mother, her stepmom. And she can cook. And I thought, man, if her mom can cook and she cooked cookies like that, we're in like Flynn. Do you know that was the only recipe my wife knew how to cook was cookies? Let me tell you, you can only eat cookies for so long. The kids used to say when the fire alarm went off, dinner was done. But do you know, I stuck with it. And I kept encouraging her. Hey, it's all right. We scraped some of this burn off of this. We're good. And now she has about 15 recipes that are to die for. She never got there. And you can live on 15 recipes, trust me. She'd have never got there had we just kept finding fault, kept saying, give it up. How many of us are on the cusp of stopping service to the church just because somebody keeps critiquing it? Somebody says, I can do it better, or you didn't do it well enough, or you're not within the tradition. Who cares? I mean, if we get a clown act in here on a Sunday morning, that might be something we could complain about. But the point is God wants the heart behind the effort. You know, they watch Chitty Chitty Bang Bang on Friday. Not my favorite. But I didn't say pick a different movie, because I know the heart's behind the effort. And I know what they want. They want people coming in from our community and from our church and having a good time that's wholesome and healthy and introduces them to a relationship with Jesus Christ. So whether it was a movie I'd have picked or not, I don't care. The fact remains, that's the heart behind it that matters. So how do we encourage one another? Some of us have had this happen to us, right? Whether on the athletic field or in the military or from a teacher or from a parent or from a friend or not a friend. Some of us have had this. And you know, there are times where we need to maybe get ripped into a little bit. But you don't, I used to tell the people that worked for me, you don't use a .45 caliber bullet to kill a squirrel. You know what? You don't use a .45 caliber bullet to change somebody's whole life because of something small. And also, you don't use the Chinese water torture on them either, where it's a drip of complaint at a time. And you know, each of us know people in this world that when we meet them, the first thing out of their mouth is a complaint or a whine. You can be an encouragement by changing your attitude. Just like I had to literally force myself with the chicken and the dog situation. Look, I'm not opposed to throat chopping anybody. But you know what? By handling that situation differently, now I got a happy neighbor and a happy wife. But I had to choose an attitude that would make that so. Against what I really wanted to do. You really don't want to kill Jason. Sometimes maybe. But you see, that's the thing, is that we have to fight on the battlefield that Christ gives us armament for. Because we fight in His name. Be an encouragement through giving. Now you might think, well, how does that encourage people? I can't give very much. Oh, it doesn't matter how much. What matters is the heart behind the how much. You let God work on the heart, He'll take care of the how much. He really does. You let God work on your heart, He'll take care of the how much. I've never seen Him fail in that endeavor. It's always been, when I get a little stingy with God, it seems that He's a little stingy with me. When I just turn it over to God, there just seems to be a blessing that pours out. God's teaching me valuable lessons about the heart. Be an encouragement in action. In action. Make it your aim to encourage people. And let's be clear. This doesn't mean to just shine on to them. This doesn't mean just to give them some fluff so they can get out of your face. This means you take an attitude that you're going to find a silver lining in the cloud that has come your way. Now, I know Priscilla's not here, but I'll tell you what, she has been an encouragement to me in her attitude, as she's probably been for everybody here. That doesn't mean the seriousness of her illness isn't there. It's before her and before us. But the seriousness of her faith is equal to or better than that. You see, when we choose to do things God's way, when we choose to take an attitude that will overcome the discouraging circumstance or the complaint, that makes a world of difference to everybody around us. In fact, in the case of Priscilla, it humbles me because I don't know that I would be the same kind of person in the same situation as she's been. I'm sure she's had her bad days, as we all do. Because we're not perfect, remember that? But attitude is always a choice. Look, when I taught survival, and I love teaching survival, in all types of weather, it would have been, could you imagine what it would have been like had I gone up to my students and we're getting ready to go on the trail and walk probably 15 miles in that day carrying heavy backpacks, and it's raining out, and I went, oh, we're just going to die. Do you think they'd have the confidence to follow that? No. Be an encouragement in action. So are you discouraged today? Have someone came and rained on your parade? Even this morning? You got a couple of options. One, turn them over to me and Phil. We'll take them out to the ultimate cage of death. But that means when you discourage someone, you'll have to go there too. Great way to lose a congregation. But typically, there are moments when we're discouraged. And someone did it to us. Not just the circumstance of an empty pocketbook. It's bad enough to have an empty pocketbook. It's bad enough to have a car that's not running. It's bad enough to have some illness. But then to have someone come along and rain on your parade just when you're just about ready to deal with all that. Are you discouraged today? Has you had those moments in your life? Are you almost thinking, what's the point? What's it worth? Do you need a pick-me-up? Well, coffee will take you so far. But I got some other advice for you. And I got some time to give it. Because I'm encouraged. First of all, remember Jesus. Remember the chief encourager amongst us. Remember him. He goes before us. The Bible tells us he never forsakes us. He doesn't leave us, doesn't kick us to the curb when we've got a bad day. Does not kick us to the curb. He is there for us. Even when you and I perform badly. You know, for us Wesleyan Arminians, it's hard for us to get our head around that. This is where I think Calvin's got a stronger argument about the grace of God. I don't see Jesus as behaving fickle just because we have. I see him there with me in the best of times and the worst of times, irrespective of my poor or good performance. Remember Jesus. He is there for you right now. And you know what? He understands the big picture. Find the faithful. You know who they are. You know who they are. So why aren't you hanging out with them? Look, I had a good friend, Bud Wagner. He was like a dad to me. And there were a time in our marriage, Tina and I had a really rough time in our marriage when I was in my first pastorate. I was involved in my master's degree, 14-month program. I was preaching in a church. I'd never been a pastor before, so it was my first pastorate. I was commuting 140 miles a day. I was also involved, because I didn't have my district license, I had to do 8 classes in the district course of study, a full year in 1 year. And that's enough for anybody by itself, but I had my master's on top of that. And we had moved to a new town, and I was in town 6 days a week, in Spokane 6 days a week. It was a tough time. There was a harsh words between Tina and I. I went and sought out somebody who knew me, somebody who I knew to be faithful, somebody I could go to for counsel, somebody who put things in their perspective and did not discourage me. Now, maybe I'm the only one who has those kinds of situations where him and his wife might get a little cross swords. Maybe the rest of you, and don't you say anything, Lil, because I got a story on you. Maybe the rest of you are good to go. Find the faithful, and you know who they are. Avoid the discouragers. You know who they are. You know what a discourager does when they are all by themselves? They begin to evaluate, why am I all by myself? Maybe it's because every word out of your mouth is negative. You see, avoid the whiners. You know, we get addicted to bad news. How many of you scroll through Facebook just to see some of the latest gossip? Don't raise your hand. We don't have room at the altar. Yeah, I know it hurts, but that's what we do. And it tears us apart. This isn't the fabric that God wants woven together, one of discord, jealousy, envy, anger, complaining. Avoid the whiners. Have nothing to do with them. And they will come to an attitude check. Hey, why is nobody hanging out with me anymore? Maybe it's because everything you say is negative. And maybe that's the moment in time they will begin to say, maybe I could choose a different attitude. Surround yourself with success. Surround yourself with success. Look, there's a great cloud of witnesses, Hebrews says, that have gone before us, that are there with us right now. You surround yourself with successful people who've been through this before. Learn from them. Model yourself after them. Take time. Take advantage of that. And I guarantee you, your experience in the church, your experience in your faith will take off like a rocket. Don't choose to go where the complainers go just because some of their news seems sensational and emotional. You don't have the emotional capital to waste on it. And you shouldn't tolerate it. You shouldn't tolerate it. And you know how you don't tolerate it? You don't get back on Facebook and go, well, that was terrible. You go to the person and you say, you know what, Val, I expected more of you. Or I expected more of you, Ned. That means so much more than getting on the gossip phone or the text or the ride to and from work or the coworker or the classmate to talk people down. Surround yourself with success. Stay focused. You know what? There will come a time when someone will come right into the middle of your life and discourage you. And you'll feel about this big. And you'll question whether or not you need to keep going in this direction. Seek Christ. Find the faithful. Surround yourself with success. And stay focused. Look, if the people who are for you are successful and faithful people, they will not steer you in a wrong direction. They might give you different ideas. Some you can take and some you can trash. Don't matter. But they may give you some different ways of accomplishing something. So when you get discouraged, don't get off there out on a rabbit trail. Go to those you trust. Those people that are natural encouragers. And remember, they're not shining onto you. They've got something invested in you, and that's their love and their affection. You know, when I talked to my friend Bud Wagner, he didn't have all rosy news like, oh yeah, your wife's just wrong about all this. He told me where I was wrong. He helped me see it from a different perspective and an unemotional one. And in that process, Tina and I grew together even better. So which one are you? Now, some of you who are millennials may not know this cartoon. This is Lippy the Lion and Hardy Har Har. Lippy the Lion was the perpetual optimist. And he was always coming up with a grand scheme or plan and by which to conduct affairs. Hardy Har Har was the pessimist. And the difference between an optimist and a pessimist is that a pessimist is better informed. I had a friend named Scott Speck. We taught survival together. Oh man, he was just a tiny guy, and tough as nails, just tough as nails. Always had such a dry sense of humor. I remember he'd love to come on up during the worst weather, just the worst weather, wind blowing, gale force winds. Students are miserable. I'm miserable, and he'd come on up there right in front of my students, and he'd say, in the voice of Hardy Har Har, it's never gonna work. We're all gonna die. And then he'd just start chuckling and laughing. And pretty soon everybody, because he was saying what everybody was feeling. And we got over it. And we pressed on. And we accomplished the task for that day. And we kept remembering how funny that was. But do you know what, how real that is? How many times people come into your sphere of influence and they have that same mantra, it's never going to work, we're all going to die. Really? If the bulletin's not right, we're all going to die? Come on. If the men's breakfast hasn't got 75 people, we're all going to die, the earth is going to stop spinning. If my toast was dry at the women's breakfast, I-5's going to fall off into the ocean. Come on. And yet, that's what we focus on. Stupid, petty stuff. You're better than that. You serve a better Lord than that. And what you say matters. And how you say it matters. So I'm challenging us today to be encouragers, not discouragers. To be people who find good. Does that mean you disregard that when there's need to be change? No. But for goodness sake, frame it in a way that doesn't make you the chief admonisher. For goodness sake, have the kindness of heart to go talk to somebody that you cross swords with. The faithfulness to that relationship rather than just posting it out on Facebook. For goodness sake, don't get all caught up in the drama of somebody's complaint, because I'm guaranteeing you, out of 100 people, 2 who complain, they probably get their voices heard the most. And all the 98 think, then see the other 98 go, oh, I don't know if we should go that way because those 2 people are complaining. Well, look, if it's me complaining, you might want to pay attention because I rarely complain. I've eaten oxtail soup. But if it's the same old person always complaining, then why give it much credit? Why not talk to that person and say, isn't there some good things here we could begin picking out? I don't know. I don't know why I'm preaching it like this. I just thought maybe that might be helpful. And maybe it's time that we do a little attitude check. And we begin to champion one another as opposed to oppose one another. Maybe now's the time. I feel like my parents, right before company came over, in this transition, they'd always make us all wash up and comb our hair. You wash up and comb your hair so the company don't think you're really crazy. Maybe that's what I feel compelled to do, is to make sure you're ready for this transition in a way that you will just launch from it into all that God has for you. He's got great things planned for this church. Do you believe that today? He's got great things planned for your life. Do you believe that today? Don't let someone stand in the way and tell you can't do it if God says to do it. Don't let someone stand in your way and tell you that the earth is falling apart because the bulletin wasn't right. Let's look for the goodness in the hearts of men and women who are in there pitching right now. God's got great things planned, and you get to be a part of them. Let's close. Father, thank you for the challenging message that you gave me and you gave us church, your church. Thank you for directing our minds to what we could do differently in terms of just an attitude of encouragement. To just be thankful that there are other people in here pulling on the oars of the boat with us. To be thankful that there are folks here who are faithful and successful that can help direct our efforts. To be thankful that in a moment of discouragement, you're there for us. More importantly than any of this, you're there for us. And you direct us to your people who are there as well. Surround us, God, with your Spirit. Let us not be surrounded by a divisive nature. Thank you, Father, for your goodness. Thank you for the journey that you've got this church on. Thank you for the great promise you had to here at Lakewood, New Hope, a little church on the corner of LaSalle and Meadow. Thank you for an opportunity next week to baptize some people. Thank you, Father. And just to be sure, if you want to be baptized next week, please let me know. We will do spontaneous baptisms next week. John the Baptist did them all the time. But I would prefer that you be in age-appropriate and weather-appropriate clothing for the baptismal. Okay? If any of you middle-aged guys wear a Speedo, you're not